across a meme on Facebook that had a very graphic picture of a homeless person lying on the ground, dead and covered with snow. The caption read, 15 homeless people in Chicago found frozen to death. And then it went on to say, for a moment, think about how fortunate and blessed you are, how blessed we are. This meme was posted by a page I follow that is dedicated to delving into the so-called real Jesus, which makes it a conversational page where people are encouraged to express their views and hopefully have meaningful discussions. So I responded to the meme by suggesting that when we refer to ourselves as blessed because we're not sleeping on the streets, then the implication is that God likes us better than the person who is sleeping on the streets. Well, for some people, that comment was just a little too much, but after condemning me to hell, they did promise to pray for me. I get that a lot. To be fair, most people did understand what I was getting at, but I found a lot of the other comments on the meme to be very revealing about our society, our religious culture, and how quickly our critical thinking seems to vanish when we are presented by memes. Because this meme was fake. The photo was actually taken in 2015 in Canada, and the 15 homeless deaths did not happen. Nevertheless, everyone piled onto the meme with comments about how unconscionable it was that this person should freeze to death because they were homeless, and why wasn't the church out there making sure no one died from sleeping on the streets? Now remember, this is a page dedicated to discovering more about who Jesus really was. And the whole reason that it exists is because most of the participants have not been able to find Jesus in the church. So there is definitely some church hostility going on in this group. But here's what's interesting. The page has not even been around for a full year yet, and already it has over 18,000 followers. The page is called The Naked Jesus. It has well over 18,000 followers who are each, in their own way, looking to encounter Jesus somewhere besides the church because they are convinced that he cannot be found in the church. And that's why I follow it, and other pages like it, fake memes aside. It's no secret that the church has been in a downward spiral for many years now. It's no secret that churches are closing, merging, and fading everywhere because membership is too low to sustain the ministry. We're confronting that very same reality right here, right now. Some of you can recall when this place was booming. I've seen the photos. I know that Plymouth at one time was filled to capacity all the time. I know that the sanctuary held more pews and that the overflow room was part of the sanctuary, and the church was always full. But today, as we watch our own roll shrink, I know that a lot of us are feeling helpless and baffled as to why people have left. A lot of us are wondering, why don't they come back? And maybe some of us are even thinking of leaving too. The Pew Research Foundation suggests that in the U.S., more people now identify as nuns than they do as Christians. Nuns are those who claim no religious affiliation. It's spelled N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S. Clearly, people's attitudes towards the Christian church have changed dramatically. It's not just a phase or a passing phenomenon. Yet a Facebook page dedicated to discovering more about who Jesus really was has somehow managed to capture 18,000 followers in less than a year. Which tells me that people are still seeking Jesus. They've just simply stopped looking for him in the church. There are literally millions of studies on it, studies with statistics and figures and bar graphs, None of them agree or make any sense. There are studies on how to entice people back into the pews. There are studies telling you 10 things that you're doing wrong. There's been a ton of ink spilled in books and magazines and blog articles. There's a booming market for seminars, conferences, and retreats. And a lot of people are making a lot of money off this stuff, all for the sake of bringing the nuns back to church. But the nuns don't want anything to do with the traditional church. And I think today's gospel reading zeroes right in on this very situation. Today, we meet up with Jesus just as he is about to deliver one of the most famous parts of his Sermon on the Mount. I like to imagine him sitting there surrounded by at least 18,000 of his own nuns while he calls into question the institutionalized version of righteousness that is being practiced by some of the religious leaders of his day. Jesus calls them a bunch of hypocrites, and everyone in the audience is sitting there nodding their heads and saying, "Right on." And he tells his audience, don't be like them, because this isn't about speaking tours and book deals. That's just stringing a bunch of empty phrases together for your own glorification. Instead, talk to God quietly and sincerely and privately. And then he talks about forgiveness, and he presents forgiveness as the daily bread of relationships by connecting the measure that we receive to the measure that we give. Because the amount of forgiveness that we offer determines the amount of space that we have available for God's presence in our lives. If we're hauling around a bunch of anger and resentment, it has a tendency to permeate every nook and cranny of our thoughts, corrupting them and distracting us from God and from life in general. He says to them, if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. And that brings us up short. But is he really saying that God will not forgive us? Or is it just that we cannot experience God's forgiveness until we forgive others? If I want to live in God's abundance and freedom, the only way that can happen is if I set down the baggage that enslaves me. The word forgiveness means to let go. To forgive is to let go of the hurt and the images of revenge. To forgive does not necessarily mean that we forget, but it does mean that we stop allowing the past to adversely affect the present. I remember one time being so deeply hurt and offended by someone that I carried it around with me for nearly 2 years. It was there from the moment I woke up until the instant I fell asleep. And even then, sometimes I'd still dream about it. It tainted everything in my life. I prayed about it. I cried about it. And I tried over and over to give it up. But just as soon as I did, well, I'd snatch it right back up again. But then, one day, I did set it down. And that was the most blessed relief I have ever experienced in my life. I don't know why I couldn't let it go, but it sure taught me something. It taught me that along with forgiveness comes true freedom and glorious life. And that is something I will never forget. Reconciliation is the whole point of Jesus' ministry. And forgiveness is at the heart of our relationship with God and life in Christian community. So when I think about people today not being able to locate Jesus in the church, it kind of makes me wonder, has the church somehow managed to squeeze Jesus out of the picture with all of its divisions and bickering and petty resentments? That's been the church for as long as the church has been the church. Now don't get me wrong, Christ is here all the time. We couldn't squeeze him out if we wanted to. But if the church is filled with a bunch of grudges and resentments, then wouldn't it be too bogged down to even notice him? It's an easy trap to fall into. So easy, in fact, we don't even realize that we're doing it half the time. But other people see it. And when they see it in the church, they call it hypocrisy. Is the church in the middle of another Reformation? It could very well be that we are. In fact, observing sights like the naked Jesus makes it pretty clear that we are. Maybe another good shake-up is exactly what the church needs. But we've had a few of those already, and here we are again. Which seems to suggest that the only real hope for the church is for it to finally take seriously the gospel of Jesus Christ. Everything that Jesus taught had to do with experiencing God through our relationship with others. In order to make room for God, we have to learn to let go of all of the stuff that tarnishes our relationships. And believe me, that takes practice and patience and prayer. And sometimes, boy, it's like one step forward and two steps back. But every single time you release your death grip on a resentment, it's like losing 50 pounds overnight. I swear it. And if people want to experience the freedom of Christ, then that's how you get there. Forgiveness and letting go. Any religion in the world that is worth its salt will tell you that. Actually, millions of recovering alcoholics owe their lives to letting go of their resentments. At the heart of the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book is the message that resentment is the #1 cause of the disease. And there are 12 steps for overcoming this resentment. The first 3 steps are: we admitted that we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And then we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood it. Jesus can be found and experienced anywhere and in any context. The church is not Jesus' legal guardian. So why bother with the church then? If Jesus is everywhere and can be experienced without the church, then why bother with the church with all of its messiness and its divisions and its notoriety? Well, that depends on what we're looking for. Are we seeking to find Jesus, or are we seeking to follow Jesus? Because that's what the church is about. Alcoholics Anonymous is about relying on God to help a person stay sober. Facebook pages are about seeking like-minded individuals to have conversations with. But the church, in its purest form, is about discipleship. It's about following Jesus' path of forgiveness and reconciliation and love, and it's about experiencing and sharing that love with others. Jesus tells his followers that the synagogue or the church is not about the show. It's not about selling our brand of God to others so that they will want to join us or applaud us for our fine displays of holiness. In fact, he instructs us to practice our religion quietly and privately so that we don't attract attention. Jesus is everywhere, and finding him is easy. But when we take up his yoke and follow him together, we quickly find ourselves on the road less traveled. And boy, that's some really hard work. At the end of the day, not everyone wants to walk that path. I think the problem before was the church tried to cram everyone into the same jar. And that worked for a really long time. People attended church because, well, you kind of had to if you wanted to be accepted. But now people are waking up to the realization that they have a choice, that they don't have to attend church, and many of them are choosing to walk away. The church is about following Jesus together as a community, and it is not for the faint of heart. There is no end to it, and it can be both inconvenient and very tiring. Some of the other followers are annoying. It can take years to see the results. And there is a limitless potential for disappointment and heartbreak. And sometimes loving people that we really want to hate is just plain hard. Discipleship is not for everyone, which means that the church is not for everyone. And trying to herd everyone back into the jar is a complete waste of time that we could instead be spending on our own discipleship. I could go on, but here's the thing. All those risky extensions of ourselves, all of the long-haul commitment and giving till it hurts, that's also where the blessing is. That's also how healing happens and where new, true life in Christ Jesus is found. For those of us who remain, we're here because we choose to be. We choose the path of discipleship. We choose to follow him. And if we can just focus on walking this path together with his guidance, then we will remain the church. May it be with you all according to God's word. Amen.